Granger knows that if you're a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing facility and your machinery isn't working right, you need to understand what's wrong as soon as possible. So when a conveyor motor falters, Granger offers diagnostic tools like calibration kits and multimeters to help you identify and fix the problem. With Granger, you can be confident you have everything you need to keep your facility running smoothly. Call 1-800-GRANGER, click Granger.com, or just stop by. Granger, for the ones who get it done.
Hello, hello. There we go. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Okay, we'll give it. Well, we're pretty good. Okay, everyone. Put away your phones. Take out your headphones. Take off your hoods. Don't make me call out your name. I see you, Manny. You're not hiding very well. Take off your hood, Manny. Okay? And headphones that you're hiding in your hood. Okay, everyone. Good morning. Did you guys miss us? Wow. It's okay. I understand. It's kind of cold outside, isn't it? Everyone's doing okay? Yeah? Okay. So today we have a wonderful guest speaker. Okay? Ms. Tisdale. February 1st, which is yesterday, marks the first day of Black History Month, okay? And today will mark the first day of our Excellence Week. And I'll explain that a little bit after today's presentation, but to kick off Excellence Week, we have a local historian that really specializes in Bridgeport and our area's history. And you might not realize how much history is in this area. Okay, and so she's going to share this morning and kind of educate us on the depth of history that we're actually at this point right here. Okay, so if you were here last year, she wasn't able to make it, but we were able to see a video, and in the video it pointed out several locations that are very close, that you've walked by, that you've seen, but now she's here and she's going to give a presentation. So I really recommend you plug in and pay attention, because this is all relevant to where you are and where we are. And those of you that are Bridgeport born, Bridgeport raised, you can also see what's surrounding you on a daily basis. So it's actually quite special and quite important. Okay? So let's give Miss Tisdale a round of applause.
Good morning. I know it's early. It's especially early for me. When I got up this morning, I wondered how I did it all those years going to school so early in the morning. Because you have something to look forward to when you go to work. You don't have to start quite this early and without coffee. All right. So I also understand, besides it being Black History Month, it's the start of Excellence Week or month. So have you guys thought about the whole idea of excellence? I see you nodding your head. What's your name? Okay. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. I mean, what do you think of, what is excellence? When you think of excellence, what do you think of? Oh, I see all the hands just flying up at once. So this is Excellence Week. You're kind of thinking about it? Well, is there a person of excellence that you can think of? In the whole wide world, there's no person of excellence that you can think of? Okay, I see a hand. Can you speak up? All right. A recommendation there. All right, so let me ask you this. What one word comes to mind when you think of her excellence? Why do you think she's excellent? Okay, so because she's a principal, so that means she's achieved something, right? Yeah. You have to do a lot to become a principal. You have to learn a lot, right? So I mean, in terms of, I'm going to get 3 people or before I start this. So excellence. What are your own goals for excellence? Somebody must have a goal for excellence. Not one person has a goal for excellence? Let me see. How about graduating from school? You guys want to graduate from school? Okay, I heard a yup. Can you do that without a certain level of excellence? I saw a hand over there. What do you think of as excellence? Going to the college you want to, all right? Is that going to be easy, do you think, or do you have to do things, work in order to go? Yeah, you got to work for it. Okay, one more person. What do you think of as excellence? Has anyone done something excellent in the last week? Nobody's done anything excellent? Okay, we have a hand there. You got? Oh, that's good. You got paid? What you get paid for? Your job? For working? All right. So yeah, working is a sign of excellence. So we're going to talk about excellence in the context of the history right here. All right? Where am I pointing this? Okay. So we often take the place that we live for granted, right? That's where we are. That's the south end of Bridgeport. And that's us on a Google map. And you can see the park. If I zoomed in, you could probably also even see the school. All right, now this map, believe it or not, it shows Bridgeport in way back in 1848. This map was done during the time, it was done by an agency that was actually founded by Thomas Jefferson. And back then, they weren't entirely sure what the country looked like. So they sent people out by boat to sail along the coast to figure out what was there and what things looked like. It wasn't easy back then. You didn't have the internet or social media. Hey, I'm living in Bridgeport. No, you didn't have that back then, right? So they actually had to go through a lot of work to find out where people were. So in this case, they had a boat going along the coast, and the guy drew this map, and then he brought it back to Washington, D.C., where it remains in the records today. And what's significant about this is that as he was going by, he noticed something. Does this have a laser on it? On the top, okay. Oh. Do you see this area right here? What's that? Yeah, it's the south end of Bridgeport. So way back in 1848, they noticed from the water that this city existed. And all these little black squares, those are structures and houses. And here, this is the Little Liberia area. So way back in 1848, the same year that the Mary and Eliza Freeman houses were built, the government actually saw this settlement from the water. There's a close-up view from the same map. There's the harbor. And this is a schooner. All right, so why am I showing a schooner? Because back in 1848, did you have cars? Did you have trucks? Did you have planes? What was the only way people could get around besides their feet and horses and stuff? Boats, exactly, by boat. So even though most of us can't just jump in a boat and sail, back then, a lot of people in this area, maybe all of them, actually knew how to jump in a boat and sail, because that's the only way that you could cover long distances at that time. So the water becomes a very important part of the heritage here. A lot of the men who lived in the Little Liberia area, and that was from the railroad tracks to Atlantic, and then from Lafayette over to the harbor, a lot of them worked as seamen and in the whaling trade. Now, Little Liberia was founded by Black people and indigenous people. And it was because they couldn't live in freedom, not even in Connecticut. So Connecticut actually had slavery legally here until 1848, but even that didn't free all people. If you were born between certain years, then it freed you, but otherwise you were still enslaved. So the only place that Black men and men of color could actually work and get paid the same amount as a white man, be able to start businesses, support their families, or by working in very dangerous jobs out at sea. So here they are in what they call dories, these little rowboat-looking things, in the middle of the ocean, trying to catch this whale, kill this whale that is actually lifting their boats up in the water. And there was a young man from a family here. The boats returned with, all of the goods and whaling, the goods that the whaling had allowed them to buy, but he died. So a lot of men here, they went to sea and they risked their lives in order to achieve excellence for their families. So there's a book written about that called Blackjacks, and it was written by a friend of mine many years ago. But what it tells about is how, in order to try to achieve excellence, how Black men and men of color, way back in the 1800s and earlier, went to sea. And fully about 20% of all the crew that were in any of the tall ships, I mean, have you ever seen the old movies with all the tall ships, or, that time we tend to think that, well, there weren't people of color out there, but fully almost a third in some ships, and maybe all crews, and some other ones, they were on these ships. So what did that teach us? They sailed, the men in Little Liberia did everything from fight pirates in the China Sea. They sailed up near the Arctic. They sailed to South America. They sailed throughout the Caribbean, and it was during the time of slavery, which is really interesting, because they used the same waters that were used to capture and degrade people. They used them to earn money in order to fuel the abolition movement that would change the world and how people were perceived and push human rights for all people. And they did that not in some far-off place. They did that from right here in Bridgeport, from right here in the South End. This man is William Sherman, and he is one of the founders of Little Liberia, and he's part Black and part Pagusset. And he was not a sea captain, but he worked as a first mate. But not only that, he used his money and he invested it here in the South End. So this settlement that allowed people to live in freedom also allowed people to develop businesses. And William Sherman was one of these men who did that. Later on in time, as Little Liberia, the city moved into the Little Liberia area and people had ended up having to disperse, he actually used money to buy land to be used as the Pagusset Reservation that's in Trumbull today, because he wanted to make sure that he helped people. He also was a nurse. Not only was he a seaman in his younger days, but in older days, he became a nurse, and he was well known for going around to families where there were elderly and helping them with their health needs. So oftentimes when we look at maps of the world, we kind of think of our part of the world as looking like this. This is how we picture the map. But we also all have Google. We have Google now, and we can also just zoom in on certain parts of the world. We're very aware that the world is round, and you can also shift the perspective of how you look at the world. So when I was in school, this is the way we looked at the world, which made it seem like there wasn't much beyond the oceans, and the oceans were, I don't know, some far off place. But the people in Little Liberia, they looked at the world a different way. They looked at it like this. So you have Connecticut, which is, hold on, geography, somewhere in here, right? But they tended to look at the world kind of like, this is the Atlantic Ocean, sort of like a great big lake, right? So they would get in their boats right at the harbor, and they could travel this way, across toward Africa, up toward Europe, near the Arctic, and then all these places in the Caribbean were well within their reach by boats. And so what happened is they built a relationship with other free settlements of color. They also traded, so that way they could bring money into the local community, and they exchanged political ideas, which was really, really important. No one treasures freedom more than people who were enslaved. And they were determined that everyone should know freedom. And their conscience wouldn't let them stop without trying to make that happen. So here's where we are now. Here are the Freeman houses. You folks are down that way. You know that they're taking this down, and here's the water. The water was actually closer. The water was around here, and this whole area was also water. And so the area was awash with water, which we notice now when there's water in the streets, right? The water still tries to come up and come back to where it used to flow. This is where Little Liberia is, and South End is, in respect to the map of Bridgeport. Little Liberia, the South End area, was founded in 1821, which was actually 6 months before Bridgeport was chartered as a city. And although it seems close to downtown now, there used to be a swamp. They described it as an impenetrable swamp, and it was really hard to get from here just downtown. So with the water being here, it allowed the people of Little Liberia to establish their own community that was free, that was very diverse, with people who came from the Caribbean, who came from there were interesting people who passed through too, some from South America and even from Africa, and it allowed them also to participate in the Underground Railroad, but by boat, freedom through sail, because people weren't watching them, and since it was a community of people of color, it didn't matter if a few extra people showed up, you know, people from the outside couldn't tell. So when we were trying to research the Little Liberia area, the first historian to do this was Charles Brilvich, and he wanted to know what were those houses at the very south of the map, what was going on there. So he turned to this 1850 map, which named every single house. It showed who the owners were, and so he fully expected to figure that out from the map as well when he came to the south end. But in the south end, you'll notice there aren't names next to the boxes. The only thing that shows up on the 1850 map is a church called the North African Church and a church called the South African Church. And so he knew that something was different in this community, because for years it had been taught that there was really nothing in Bridgeport south of downtown early on. But we now know from the map, right, from the Thomas Jefferson's agency, and also from this early map, that things were going on in the South End. But it was mostly because it was being done by people of color, and back then there was quite a bit of prejudice in sort of the historical industry, and they just didn't think it was important. So in about 2008, an architect superimposed some of the houses from Little Liberia onto a modern map. And then working with the records, we figured out what it looked like in the old days. So as you notice, you have Main Street here, you have Broad Street here, you have Lafayette here. And it looked a lot different, obviously. These are the Freeman houses, and these were the North and South African churches. So people settled here because they wanted to live in freedom, because they could build and buy property. Say they bought this property and they developed it, they built their own houses. And because people could come together in one place, because the men had seen the world and had discussions about politics and felt empowered because they were making a living, they had jobs and they had money, right? And they were educating themselves. They actually pulled together a state convention. These were Black and Native abolitionists, mostly Black abolitionists, who started the Underground Railroad movement. They were part of it here in Connecticut. And when I was young, I was taught that the Underground Railroad was started by Northern white people, who then went south and freed Black people who didn't know how to free themselves. As it turns out, people like the folks in Connecticut who were part of the Colored Men's Convention movement, back then, remember, women didn't have as much freedom as men, they couldn't vote, etc. They actually put together the Underground Railroad movement and found allies in the white community who also did strive toward excellence ethically, excellence in terms of their values, and they saw people as human beings. So this is Frederick Douglass when he was a young man, and most people know about Frederick Douglass being an abolitionist. He had contemporaries right here in Bridgeport, and in fact, his mentor was the reverend at one of the churches here in the South End. What's now Walters was Zion Church, and his mentor was there. That church also shared pastors with his church in New Bedford, Mass. But he, as I mentioned, he had contemporaries, people like him. This is George Francis, and it says here on the bottom, His Imperial Highness George Washington Francis of Bridgeport, Connecticut, cousin of the Emperor of Haiti. All right? I don't know if anyone here has any roots in Haiti, but Haiti had freed itself very early on through a revolution, and a lot of Haitians then came here, and they settled in Black communities, and they also assisted here with the idea of civil rights and human rights. And George Washington Francis, he played a major role here in Bridgeport and also in Connecticut and as part of the larger abolition movement. He was a very interesting man, very involved in politics. He eventually had to leave here because of segregation laws. His second wife was a white woman, and that was illegal in Connecticut. So it's a long story, but basically his first wife died early on, and I don't know if maybe there was some sort of disease going around, but he had business dealings. He had what they called a fancy goods store, which I imagine was a store kind of like a department store of its time, where you could get all the finer things and fabric, and also, you could also get your hair done and your hair cut and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, he worked with in partnership with a white business in Bridgeport, and I suspect there was some kind of illness at that time. He lost his wife, and the wife of the partner in the white business lost her husband. They got married. He was out of town on business. Her family had her locked up, put her in an insane asylum. It's like a soap opera, right? And he comes back and he's like, what's going on? Someone actually came and said, look, George, they put your wife in an insane asylum. So he gets a lawyer from New York. They come to the insane asylum here and they free his wife. But then that means that he has to move because interracial marriage is illegal in Bridgeport at that time. He goes to New York. He becomes the first Black worker with the Census Bureau. Back then, Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, right? So a lot of Black folks were Republicans. He starts one of the first Republican parties in New York City, and it bore his name for many, many years. The Republicans were actually the party of freedom back then. So the colored conventions looked a lot like this, like any kind of national convention. Then later on, they included women, and they also fought for women's rights. Those conventions also became the foundation for things like the NAACP and Pan-Africanism. Men from here also fought in the Civil War. And here's Lewis Latimer, if you want to talk about someone of excellence. He lived here in Bridgeport for a while. Does anyone know who Lewis Latimer is? Okay, so Thomas Edison, you always hear about creating the light bulb, right, bringing light to the world. Well, his light bulb wouldn't work for more than a couple of seconds at a time, so it wasn't commercially viable, and it was useless. Lewis Latimer, who lived here in Bridgeport and whose brother had lived here for many, many years, he created a filament that made the light stay on. So he's literally part of the legacy of bringing light to the entire world. And he lived right here in the South End. This is what people looked like back then. We talked about the men. We didn't talk much about the women because we don't have images, and women had different roles back then. And we haven't found writing yet from the women. So this is an artist's vision of what Mary and Eliza Freeman looked like, the houses on Main Street, but we don't know what they looked like. Eliza was born before photography, and we don't have any images of Mary. But their property told the story, and if it weren't for their property standing, we would know nothing about this community or of this rich history. This is what the houses will look like when we're finished. This one, oops, sorry. This one's under construction right now. Now I'm looking and my time is up. So these are just artifacts that we found. And this is what the area looked like then, this is what it came to look like. Now, there have been changes since then. Bassick is now built. This coal pile is gone. But these blocks are still devastated. And when I think of excellence, I think, what could the people, the men especially, because mostly men did things back then by law, if they had thought about developing this area then, not just with the idea of extracting, taking advantage of resources to build businesses, but if they had thought also about the ideals of the little Liberians in terms of bringing equality and human rights and opportunities for women, the actual landscape would even look different today. So as you strive for excellence, think about, how you can put your genius, because I believe everyone who showed up on God's earth was invited here because they brought a little spark of the Creator and their genius, to help everyone else. What will you build with your excellence? Will you build something that looks like this? Or can you imagine something different? A lot of our neighbors imagine something different. It's not all possible now because these buildings are quickly disappearing, but a creative placemaking plan, a heritage trail that really tells the history of the South End. Maybe we can't do it as some of the buildings disappear, but I bet you could do it by coming up with some kind of a map or a walking tour that really talks about the history of excellence that this area had, and thinks about the dreams that you would have, what you would build here instead of that strange industrial landscape that I showed you. These are some ideas of some people came up with for our area. Having a Freeman Center across from the houses, having a museum and neighborhood history, community gathering places, marketplaces. Our neighbors came up with these ideas. So this just shows the potential and the fact that we are still on this water. And this is a painting that someone did. It's on display at University of Bridgeport that sort of summarizes the history of the South End area with Mary and Eliza depicted in the front. They grew up on a farm in Derby and took care of their parents until they died. They developed, the two of them and their family, they're responsible for developing most of the South End, and then sort of a modern Bridgeport that emerged. So I want to thank you for having me today, and I want you to think about the fact that there is excellence in every single one of us, right? And your teachers are here to help you find it, and I hope they'll have me back to do a workshop, and I hope that we can put together a walking tour. You can see, like, which of these people who lived here in the past are you the most like? And, what kind of things do you have in common? Because I sincerely believe, I know, not just believe, that each of you are here for a purpose. And your teachers will help you find that purpose. And then you'll get awesome jobs and get paid, make a difference in the world, and you won't have to get up so early in the morning. Anyway, thank you for having me here.